Усім привіт! Це подкаст «Коли все має значення». Мене звати Ангеліна Керекіна, а зі мною разом, як завжди,
Наталка Гуменюк. Всім вітання.
Привіт, Наталко! Нарешті у нас виходить випуск, якого ми давно чекали, з людиною, яку складно упіймати, але яка варта всіх очікувань. Це Марія Реса, філіппінська або американо-філіппінська, якщо можна так сказати, журналістка, засновниця і керівниця відомого видання філіппінського Rappler і лауреатка Нобелівської премії миру. З Марією була у нас нагода познайомитися особисто в мене в Бонні на великій журналістській конференції, і я була вражена деякими речами, що до неї зараз розкажу. Ти знаєш її раніше, і я не впевнена, по-моєму, ти її навіть знаєш раніше, ніж вона отримала премію, так? Розкажи, будь ласка, як давно ти її знаєш і за яких обставин ви поспілкувались?
Так, це, до речі, ювілейний 100-й випуск нашого подкасту, тому всю команду і слухачів вітаю, відмотуйте, у вас є шанс послухати 99 випусків.
100 випусків вже, ого, нічого.
Так, саме так. З Марією Ресою я познайомилася в 2014 році. Тоді я працювала на громадському. Rappler, ми були приблизно в одній ваговій категорії, скажімо так, і були на спільному заході, в нас, здається, навіть були спільні донори в Нью-Йорку, і мене дуже зацікавила ця пані на той час, тому що вона була надзвичайно активною і постійно знімала все, що я роблю. Мається на увазі, робила якісь трансляції, я виступала, вона писала в телефоні, одразу транслювала. Таке враження, в неї було кілька всього. Вона була така дуже активна, мобільна, щось записувала, розказувала. Треба розуміти, що Марія дійсно легендарна філіппінська журналістка, і вона була одним з ключових журналістів CNN. Південно-Східній Азії, йдеться про 90-ті, 2000-ті. І здобула фактично міжнародне ім'я вже там. Потім, повертаючись до Філіппін, очолювала одне з найбільших видань на Філіппінах. Вона вирішила повернутися на батьківщину і, власне, заснувала видання Rappler, яке було незалежним онлайн-виданням, і зараз залишається надзвичайно важливим. І тоді я слідкувала за її долею. Окрім того, Марія була людиною, яка завжди дивилася, вона писала не тільки про Філіппіни, там до влади прийшов президент Родриго Дутerte, який використовував поліцію і сили безпеки в так званих нарковійнах, тобто він, умовно кажучи, вивівши ідею того, що країна потерпає від наркотиків, фактично дозволив вбивства людей, які умовно продають наркотики, так, але або наркозалежні, але загалом це, як вона зараз описує, це була війна проти бідності, проти насамперед бідних людей в тому числі. Але що було особливого, Дутерте був такою людиною, яка використовувала Фейсбук і соцмережі на свою користь і фактично мобілізувала велику частину суспільства в кампанії цькування журналістів. І в той час, коли Марія про це почала писати, ще не було якоїсь думки, що Фейсбук може використовуватися там тролями і ботами, і тому ми її статті на громадському перекладали. І вони публікувалися, статті Раплера в ті часи, це були перші статті. Я, до речі, пам'ятаю, що одна з них перша виходила, коли була певна кампанія цькування проти журналістів громадського, і нам доводилося пояснювати, що це не просто люди реально пишуть коментарі, що є такий феномен. Це попри те, що українці добряче теж знайомі з цією історією там російської пропаганди, дезінформації. І потім влада Філіппін, зокрема президент, почав її переслідування, проти неї почалися суди за надуманими справами, за статті, які вона не писала, за статті, умовно кажучи, там все було страшенно надумано, і її затримували. Ми за неї дуже переживали, і це було задовго до 2021 року, коли вона отримала, власне, Нобелівську премію разом з редактором «Нової газети» Дмитром Муратовим. Це було напередодні повномасштабного вторгнення.
Давай розкажемо один з найбільш цікавих, мені здається, елементів вашої розмови. Де ви з нею говорили, за яких обставин?
Нарешті я Марію зловила, ми постійно перетинаємося на різних великих заходах і конференціях, але це було на Філіппінах. Видання Марії Rappler організовує щорічну конференцію Social Good Summit. Це одноденна подія, і я була запрошена виступити там, зокрема, і так само була запрошена з України Олександра Матвійчук, наша Нобелівська лауреатка. Вони по своїй, скажімо так, мережі з Марією спілкуються, але я скажу, що дуже приємно було бути на цьому заході, окрім того, що перед нашим виступом з філіппінськими журналістами ключовими гостями цього саміту були Амаль і Джордж Клуні. Амаль Клуні є адвокаткою Марії Реси. Вона стала адвокаткою Марії Реси, сама висловила це бажання до того, як Марії дали Нобелівську премію, продовжує захищати її в суді, бо попри те, що президент змінився, справа не закрита, і Марію можуть заарештувати в будь-який час, все ж таки, за рішенням Верховного суду. Це дуже цікавий захід, тому що, напевно, головне мене сказали, що окрім цього, Марія надзвичайно позитивна людина, яка дуже говорить критично про сучасні технології, про те, що відбувається з інтернетом, але вона завжди посміхається, вона дуже життєрадісна, і це якісь завжди розмови і заходи про те, як добро зробити популярним. Да? І тому це Social Good Summit. Так? І, власне, вона організовувала приїзд Джорджа і Амаль Клуні до Філіппін. Звісно, цей захід, їхній приїзд такої зіркової пари викликав величезну увагу у філіппінського суспільства, а отже, величезну аудиторію, зокрема, яка прийшла і на саміт. Я мала змогу говорити одразу в першій, скажімо так, дискусійній панелі після ключових гостей. Вони приїхали захистити філіппінських журналістів, тому що там відбувається багато процесів. Я, маючи змогу побувати на Філіппінах, так само мала змогу і поподорожувати, і на багатьох різних островах, і в багатьох різних університетах виступити, показати наші фільми. Але так, звісно, це була відповідь. Називається «Запрошення, від якого ти не можеш відмовитися».
Я, насправді, хотіла додати щодо Марії, що вона для мене приклад людини, яка ті цінності, які вона проголошує, вона їх і сповідує. Вона говорить про солідарність, і вона абсолютно не формально цікавиться справами людей, з якими вона спілкується. Мушу розказати цю історію, коли ми познайомились в Бонні, це був 22-й рік, там півроку вторгнення, велика журналістська конференція. Ми щойно познайомились, і вона захотіла взяти в мене інтерв'ю. Не я перша її попросила, бо, звісно, що я би хотіла з нею поговорити. Вона захотіла взяти в мене інтерв'ю, вона хотіла розпитати про наші дослідження і про те, що ми встигли дізнатися стосовно конструктивної журналістики, роботи з поляризацією і так далі. Вона щирим інтересом вислухала, вона записала зі мною інтерв'ю, надіслала це в Rappler, сказала, що нам це дуже важливо в цьому розбиратися, знати і так далі. Крім цього, вона ще є такою класною жінкою, яка формує спільноти жіночі, і сповідує такий класний фемінізм з людським обличчям, тому що вона якось вміє знайомити між собою класних професійних жінок, знаходити десь між ними певні зв'язки, інтереси, представляти одне одному і ці дружби між собою лагодити. Я розумію, що це також частина, напевно, роботи нобелівських лауреатів, чи частина якоїсь такої професійного навантаження на них. Але це дійсно класно, завдяки їй я особисто познайомилася з кількома надзвичайно цікавими людьми, з якими там продовжується або спілкування, або співпраця, або я слідкую. Про що ви говорили з Марією?
Я дуже старалася охопити ціле коло тем, але потрібно було, по-перше, пояснити доволі складну, але цікаву, як мені здається, для нас ситуацію на Філіппінах, тому що це суспільство живе темою боротьби з корупцією. Це для них головна тема. Вони дуже цікавляться українським досвідом. Я ще й приїхала, це було відносно нещодавно, в момент великих антикорупційних розслідувань в Україні, але особливість така. Звісно, я хотіла розповісти про її долю, про її ситуацію, бо президент Родріго Дутерте зараз перебуває в Гаазі, йому пред'являють звинувачення у злочинах і порушеннях прав людини, злочинах проти людяності, і це колишній президент, який, до речі, може повернутися до влади. Все ж таки, я була на його батьківщині, де його чекають і де його обрали мером рідного міста, попри те, що він вже був в Гаазі. Тобто тут така історія. Але там складна ще річ, що до влади прийшов новий президент Маркос, який є сином диктатора, якого на Філіппінах повалили 80-ті. І тому тут складна історія, що, умовно, демократизацію на Філіппінах провадить син колишнього диктатора, який був надзвичайно жорстким і надзвичайно корумпованим. В цей же час суспільство бореться з корупцією, але я все ж таки керувала нашу розмову тим, на чому особливо спеціалізується Марія. Вона дуже багато зараз займається і говорить про те, що неконтрольованість соціальних мереж, того, що відбувається в Кремнієвій долині, того, що ми називаємо там біктеком, є надзвичайно шкідливим для суспільства, і це величезна загроза, яка посилює диктатури по світі. Марія бере участь в дуже багатьох інституціях, які підтримують якісну журналістику. Ми говорили про те, як протистояти оцій технологізації, тому як сучасні технології працюють на користь диктатурам і авторитаризму, і як цьому протистояти, як створювати медіа суспільної ваги. Ми говорили і про Сполучені Штати, де вона проводить багато часу, тому що вона дуже довго намагалася пояснити, умовно кажучи, як, зокрема, і Трамп став президентом завдяки цим технологічним гігантам. Я таки говорила також і про політику пам'яті на Філіппінах. Скажімо так, було минуле, яке всі засудили, і тут повертається, і намагаються зараз переписати частково якусь історію старої диктатури. Нас це, звісно, цікавить, як зробити так, щоб не стерти пам'ять, яка є болючою. Звісно, обов'язково запитувала Марію про те, як взагалі про її журналістський шлях. Чому вона повернулася, будучи кореспонденткою CNN, в рідну країну, в непросту країну, і засновувала власне видання, хоча могла спокійно, залишатися топ-номер 1 азійською кореспонденткою найвідомішого телеканалу в світі. Як вона організовує команду, як вона бачить свою роль, отримавши Нобелівську премію, від якихось деталей, як вона взаємодіяла з Дмитром Муратовим так само, але більшою мірою я все-таки говорила, куди вона хоче, щоб рухався світ.
Ну що ж, давайте слухати довгоочікувану насправді розмову Наталки з Марією Ресою, американо-філіппінською журналісткою, засновницею видання Rappler та Нобелівською лауреаткою 2021 року.
Ми дуже дякуємо нашим слухачам, вам за ту підтримку, яку ви здійснюєте для цього подкасту, зокрема для роботи наших чудових колег, звукорежисерки Люби Гук і редакторки Іри Лопатіної. І на прохання ваше ми це зробили. Ми створили на сторінці лабораторії журналістики суспільного інтересу не просто сторіночку, де ви можете донатити за реквізитами, але й можливість робити одноразовий донат і регулярний донат. Довелося нам попрацювати над цим, але тепер це можливо. Знаю, що ці донати приходять. Це дуже-дуже нас підтримує. Знаємо, що в Україні багатьох потрібно підтримувати, але якщо є така змога, щоб ці розмови далі виходили, ми вам неймовірно вдячні. Це дуже надихає. I'm glad to see you, not in a rush, in between all those
it's still crazy. It's been a
conferences.
crazy day. Yeah. But at least we're not in a conference, and I'm not. I felt like a performing seal, because I've been doing this since 2016, right? I've been trying to raise the alarm. It's funny because right before I came home, right before I came to Manila, right, I was somewhere in Europe. Then I flew to New York. Then from New York, I flew to Boston. This is every day. Europe, New York, Boston, San Francisco. And then I flew to Manila in the middle of the typhoon. What was fascinating is in Boston, I was at the place where Paul Revere, the guy who in American history road, the British are coming, so he alerted everyone, and then the Minutemen during the Revolutionary War came and fought the British, right? That was Paul Revere. The day before, Hillary Clinton called me Paula Revere, because that's what I feel I've been doing since 2016, when what happened here in the Philippines, I would say I was like Sisyphus and Cassandra combined. The patterns and the trends were clear. What happened here was happening everywhere else. Well, what happened in Ukraine? It was Ukraine and the Philippines first. You guys were 2014. We were 2014 in terms of changing our history. So for you, the meta-narrative seeded in 2014 for Ukraine was what was used to annex Crimea. And then 8 years later, this is Russia, 8 years later, that same meta-narrative was used to invade Ukraine itself by Putin. In our case, in the Philippines, in 2014, Marcos Jr. was a Jedi Knight. And then it began to change history for us. So his father, Marcos, Ferdinand Marcos, was ousted in a people power revolt in 1986 because he allegedly stole 10 billion US dollars. In 1986, that was huge. This is the government. Marcos was the man that reopened the Swiss bank accounts, right? The Swiss changed their banking laws because of the corruption. Anyway, so what was the meta-narrative seeded in 2014? That Marcos is not a kleptocrat dictator. He wasn't corrupt. He was the greatest leader the Philippines had ever known. And from 2014 to 2016, when his son, only son and namesake, was voted as president, we watched our history change in front of our eyes. You guys were invaded, but we were invaded in a whole other way.
So probably then start with that. Mainly explain what has happened, because there was Marcos, there was Duterte, and a lot of Ukrainians who listen to us might not know. Beyond that, Duterte now is somewhere in The Hague. But just maybe then you go back to 2014, 2016, when you say it started. So what has started?
I would call it information warfare. When social media was weaponized and the monetization, the business model of Facebook in particular. So on Facebook, for example, your friend, if you had a friend and we were friends on Facebook, Facebook would recommend your friend to me. And what they did with A/B testing is they realized that all of us punch the friends of friends and they grow faster. So the Friends of Friends algorithm was part of what splintered us. So in 2014, that was when we began to see the meta-narratives being seeded, the lies that become facts. Because in 2018, MIT came out with a study that lies spread 6 times faster. It's significantly worse today. By 2016, we had elected Rodrigo Duterte as president. The drug problem, which had long been number 8 in every survey, moved to number 1 because that was what Duterte used to sow fear, to do a brutal drug war nationwide. We watched our history change in front of our eyes because Ferdinand Marcos Jr., our president today, ran for vice president and lost by like 200,000 votes in 2016. Anyway, that's so much. Let me say it this way. Information warfare, narrative warfare, really, because of the business model of the platforms, exploited what was a sales and marketing platforms, all of these tech companies, because they wanted to make more money, a business model called surveillance capitalism. They were used by geopolitical power. In that case, Russia used. I worked with a few. Ukraine raised the alarm early, like we did. Actually, at the very first award that was given for disinformation, for efforts to stop disinformation, Rappler received one. This is NDI in 2017. And the second was Stop Fake.
Okay. Because indeed, in 2014, when the Crimea was annexed, I remember I went there a couple of months after, and we still, first of all, needed to persuade the world that, it was not so-called uprising, but it was a foreign occupation. It felt surreal for me because I've been in the place where the Crimean Tatar man was telling me that after the annexation, he had to raise prices because there was no Ukrainian goods any longer coming, and everything is more expensive. And there was a Russian lady saying like, no, everything is cheaper. And he said like, no, I've raised the prices. And I was like, how can you have that? And I do remember that still the foreign media would quote Putin and every single lie as a balance. It took Brexit, it took Trump, to some of our Western colleagues to understand that, look, sometimes politicians can tell blunt lie.
They lie, right? And actually, I think America's going through this now, but we in the Philippines in 2016, you in Ukraine, as a journalist, you realize when the leader lies, you have to call it a lie. Because it turns everything upside down. In the past, when the president of a country says something, you assume it's been fact-checked. You assume it's not wrong. But now, this is the weaponization of social media, because you say a lie a million times on social media, it becomes a fact. And that's what they used. So in 2016, I remember being in Silicon Valley and telling people what was happening to us in the Philippines. I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour. And I said, if this is happening to us, it is coming for you. That was 2016. What happened in 2018? In 2018, the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke. And the country that had the most number of compromised accounts on Facebook was the United States. Number 2, the Philippines. Because the Philippines was where they tested these tactics of mass manipulation. And then when it worked, they ported it to America.
I had a chance to tell you that it was exactly then where, for instance, we had one of the first kind of online campaign. I used to be one of the leaders and the managers of Hromadske, Ukrainian independent publication. And we were attacked by kind of bots also because of one of the scandals. And even our junior staff didn't really understand that it's not like the hate from people. It's really coordinated. And it was very hard to explain, but I remember we've translated your articles and republished to explain that Facebook, the good thing, was used for this kind of manipulation. So it was very helpful. But just to explain Duterte today, yes, the drug wars. What was that? I should also say why I want to say I was here previously with a group of the Ukrainian MPs, and they couldn't understand how somebody can do something like that. And they were like, so can you explain? So where people were just killed? So can you just explain what those drug wars were?
Here's what we compress our history. We spent 300 years in a convent and 50 years in Hollywood. 300 years of colonial rule from Spain, 50 years under America, right? And because of that, we developed in particular ways. This culture is passive-aggressive. We never really fought our colonizers. We didn't have a revolution. We adapted, right? So we're a passive-aggressive society in that sense. And then we have a constitution that's patterned after the United States, 3 co-equal branches of government, near identical to the US. What we saw under Duterte was within 6 months, using a brutal drug war where the number of people killed is the first casualty in our battle for facts. So this drug war was the way that Duterte sowed fear. You have to first understand why he did it, right? He wanted to control the military and the police, and he gave them the impunity to go and kill. It was a war against the poor more than anything, because drugs were a number 8 concern in our surveys through the years, and Duterte campaigned on it. When he campaigned using social media, it moved up to the number 1 concern. Always the number 1 concern was jobs. Always jobs. Number 2, health, education, right? It was always that. And then it shifted when Duterte ran for office. He used the drug war where essentially up to, in the first 3 years of his administration, up to 28,000 people were killed. That's according to the head of the Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines. The police will say, I watched their numbers go from 7,000 at the end of 2016 to 2,000, just like that, right? And they expected journalists to just quote police numbers. So again, number of people killed, who knows, but a lot more than was killed in the first martial law days of the first Marcos. And why did he do that? Because when you have fear, when you control the military and police, you begin to break down the checks and balances of our Constitution. Within 6 months, Duterte had crumbled. The legislature and the executive collapsed. He became the most powerful leader we had ever known. And because he was the most powerful leader, the judiciary, you're seeing this happen in America right now. It then depended on the courage of individual men and women to decide on cases, right? Of course, Rappler knows this very well because in 2017, which is right after President Duterte threatened us in his State of the Nation address, there were investigations. 21, 20, like so many investigations on Rappler. We're a small news organization. We're about 120 people. I didn't even have a chief legal officer, right? Then all of a sudden, in 2019, in 14 months, I received 11 arrest warrants, 11 criminal charges, and I thought I was going to go to jail. What is the drug war for? It intimidates, it consolidates power of the police and military. It intimidates any potential. I joke about this. It's not just a chilling effect. It's Siberia. Sorry, you live near there, but it's so what we saw was Duterte not only did the drug war to sow fear, he also used, in Tagalog, there's a phrase, sasampulan, sinampulan. He made examples. Someone from business, he named businessman within days of taking office, and that businessman's listed company dropped 50%. He named a politician and jailed her for almost 7 years, like Senator Laila de Lima. And then he named me. And I survived. Rappler is still alive, but it took so much out of us. Again, nothing like what Ukraine is going through. So I feel lucky in that. But this is a country that survived Duterte because our military refused to back him. There's a mandatory 6-year presidential term limit, and we held those elections. So I just worry now about the United States because I see so many of the same things happening.
Still, he's now in International Criminal Court. How it actually happened, because still, I think his daughter is kind of in power, and he somehow supported or backed previous current president. Looking at how Donald Trump returned to his victoriously to his position, Bolsonaro, we thought he's ousted, but he might be back. We considering Nigel Farage might be returning after the Brexit, and we thought okay. So how are you? He's there still in ICC. I've just been in Davao, in his native town, where he remains a kind of elected mayor, and was elected a mayor months after he was already indicted in The Hague, which is the thing. There are people supporting him. So how do you deal? Are you concerned that he will return? And maybe just a bit explain how somehow ICC case was possible.
I'll start with that. I think one of the things you realize, and Alexandra said this at the Social Good Summit, the people don't stop. People don't stop. Rappler didn't stop, right? And the families of the victims, the church continued cataloging. We continued the stories. Our reporter who worked on the drug war, Patricia Evangelista, wrote a book. The title is Some People Need Killing, and it has 88 pages of footnotes of stories that we have done, right? Journalists have to document it, because if you don't document it, then it didn't happen. But how did it was documented. People risked their lives to keep telling these stories. And partly because of that, we kept international attention on it. There's always a risk every step of the way. For us, it was the risk of a shutdown. It was a risk of jail. But that's part of the reason that the ICC received enough evidence. There were whistleblowers and that evidence helped get an Interpol arrest warrant. Right. That took a long time. I mean, we've been waiting for that arrest warrant for a long time. He was arrested in March this year, March 2025. And we didn't know whether the Philippines would actually arrest him. That is the biggest hurdle. the fact that our president, the second Marcos, actually the irony of that, right? That Marcos arrested Duterte and put him on a plane to The Hague. At the UN General Assembly, I opened it with 4 other women, and on that Monday, I just pointed out what the Philippines had done. Because domestically in the Philippines, that move of President Marcos made him much more vulnerable to a Sara Duterte, the daughter of Duterte, who's his vice president. This created the rift. And that's part of the reason, as we speak, there are 300,000 protesters in our park, right, in Luneta Park, ostensibly fighting Marcos. So it's look, there's domestic politics, then there's reality. So that was what happened. That was how we got Duterte to The Hague. But I think more than that, the other parts of your question.
I'm actually going into that. It's more about the Marcos dynasty, because I'm still in the generation who remember that there were notorious corrupt guys in the Philippines. They were symbolic. And then I was taught about all this peaceful resistance. And since childhood, I remember there was something off with the shoes of Imelda Marcos.
The 3,000 plus shoes of Imelda Marcos.
Yep. And
who's still alive, by the way.
And, they were ousted. They went into exile. And then, when you don't know the story, you know that there is Duterte. Duterte is against you. We were worried. I was worried for you. And then you said and son of Marcos won? Is it kind of okay? Isn't normal that the son of the dictator, which was very corrupt, is back? So my question to you, you fought Duterte, you met Marcos, you already, honestly, beyond you're the Rappler founder, CEO, you Nobel Peace Laureate, you a peasant in Philippines, so you met him, your word matters, but you're also a veteran journalist. And how is it for you? How your generation understand, who remember that the country fought Marcos? They thought they're gone. You're proud of ousting them. And now you have the guy and considered to be a kind of a good guy?
Yeah. I think there's so many ways to answer that question. I think this shows you how quickly things change. And, I wrote How to Stand Up to a Dictator, and I warned against a second Marcos presidency in that, right? But what we've seen so far is Marcos who has wanted to vindicate his family name. We've seen a Marcos who cares about what the rest of the world thinks. Again, that's critically important because Duterte did not in any way, right? We literally are still untangling the corruption scandals that people were too afraid to talk about during those 6 years. Marcos released a list of 15 contractors that began the anti-corruption investigations that led to the protests, right? This is a president who seems to want to move in the same direction, but is not used to holding all the reins of a powerful executive. He has a very powerful wife. It almost, if you look at some of the things that's happened now, he almost seems to have worked against his own cousin. He's trying. It's very interesting to see. Let me talk about it from my personal experience. Under the Marcos administration, Rappler was again allowed to report from the palace. Our access was restored to the presidency. The 11 criminal cases that were filed against me by the Duterte administration, all but one remain now. It's at the Supreme Court, which means, as Amal Clooney had said, any day I could go to jail, and it would be for nearly 7 years at the minimum. But most important, right? We won our cases. So that meant that this president did not put his thumb on the scale of trying to shut Rappler down. And there have been no new cases. Now, having said that, there is still a journalist who's in jailed underneath the Duterte administration, Francine Cumpio. I mentioned her in the Nobel lecture. There's still some killings happening. We're far from perfect. But the joke I always say, and it's not so much a joke, I think we moved from hell to purgatory, while the rest of the Western world, you Western democracies, are moving to hell. So, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, the book that I wrote, and it was published in November 2022, in October this year became number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list, because I think Americans are looking for what to do with what is happening in their country. We did a deep dive into the first 100 days of President Trump, right? The title of the report is Narrative Warfare and the Breakdown of Reality. Trump's first 100 days, he issued 143 executive orders. And those 143 executive orders didn't just do things like kill USAID. They also were the topic narratives for narrative warfare. Every EO was the topic trigger. And so this narrative warfare was happening online, polarizing people. This is the way I talk about it, infecting them with a virus. And people are infected with that virus, and they believe it. So what we're seeing is an America completely isolated into these,
Interesting how you speak about virus, because after 2015, when I was always asked about the disinformation, the Russian fakes, all those kind of things, I usually said, look, we are a bit vaccinated. Like when you hit hard, your society is a bit vaccinated because you know the challenge and you stop to trust. Yeah. And I said, look, we are kind of vaccinated from the Russian disinformation as a society, because we understood that we suffered, we were ill with it, we overcome. It doesn't mean every time the virus, isn't
but you
adapting.
Developed some resistance. And for me, in 2016, up until the pandemic hit, I was using, a tipping point of a virus, because that's the easiest way to explain it, right? Because when people believe a lie, their cognitive biases are sick. They're literally not well. So, and I'll use Yuri Andropov, who is the former KGB chair, headed the Soviet Union. He said that disinformatia is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay. But if you take it all the time, you become a changed person. You become an addict. Now imagine a world of addicts, right? That's me saying that's exactly what's happening. And imagine what happens when someone is an addict. They have to always go back, right? So that, I think, is what technology has done to us.
Your favorite topic, so big tech, what we can do with them?
Well, for one, they're two ongoing right now, right? You have the artificial intelligence for social media, which is what was used to splinter fact from fiction, right? That broke down our shared reality globally. And I've said this over and over and over, and it's backed by data we got from the Philippines. A lie is spread 6 times faster. In the Philippines, women were attacked at least 10 times more than men. So here you go. If lies spread faster, without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these three, you don't have a shared reality. You can't do anything. You can't have journalism. You cannot have democracy. So that's the reality we live in today. And that was the first problem. Now you add generative AI, which rolled out in November 2022. When did Putin invade Ukraine? February 2022. Now add deep fakes. And you have a public information ecosystem that's full of toxic sludge. That's what I use. That's the phrase I use. It's like we're being poisoned, or we're wading in virus-infested waters. But now there's a phrase that they're using for generative AI slop. So now you really can't tell fact from fiction, which weakens our democracies all around the world. And it's not a coincidence that 78%, right, of the world. This is VDEM that came out with this study that said that, the world is electing illiberal leaders democratically, right? You have to add electoral integrity. Again, it's the countries that know Russia well that did this, right? Romania in 2024. So this kind of information warfare was happening from 2014 all the way to 2024. Ukraine understood it. but no one understood Ukraine and the Philippines. We were the ones raising the alarm. But, what happened was that all these elections from 2016 were tainted. We knew this. There's evidence of it. And it took only one country had the courage to actually void their elections. And that didn't happen till 2024, November 2024. And that's Romania. And Romania had to have their elections. They moved it to 2025 in May. And why? Because they saw that a candidate who didn't even have a political party, who only campaigned on TikTok, was number one in the primaries. They had primaries. We don't even have primaries in the Philippines, right? So that's electoral integrity. Now, if you don't have electoral integrity, if you don't have agency, how can a democracy work?
I should say that also my colleagues, they did a research on the use of AI, in particular how it was, before it became kind of more common, was fed by just sheer amount of the web pages. So now if you ask more or less ChatGPT anything about Ukraine and Russia, it referred to kind of more Russian view.
Yes.
And this is also the research.
Let me just add to what you said, because ABC Australia, during their elections, actually did a very similar study, and they saw that Pravda Australia, Pravda, Russian, right? It was pumping out more than 200 stories a day. And they didn't realize that the goal is not to convince the voters, it's to feed the chatbots. And so what they saw was that in Australia during elections, 1 in 6 answers by the chatbots was Russian propaganda. But then they compared it to America, where it was 1 in 3. A third of what Americans are getting is Russian disinformation. That's insane. You poison the food of the chatbots.
And by the way, you mentioned Romania. I was recently in Romania for the presentation about all kind of the campaigns, and for me, I'm honestly saying it's not exactly the thing I cares the most. I'm probably a bit tired with the topic, and I think I know a lot of things, but it was a fascinating research when they're explaining how sometimes they're creating hundreds of different web pages, in particular to reinforce some of the idea. Then they disappear. And also, they are all connected with scamming, with kind of some astrologies and weird messages of the self-care. And then, for instance, they challenge the idea that, there is something wrong with the power grid. All of a sudden, there is a story that the country isn't capable to handle the power grid, and it's undermined generally the trust in government in a way where you have the, yoga instructors, people who sell the herbs, all of a sudden having all those stories about the distrust to the energy. And that's how it works. Totally different, but with a very specific reason.
But the same tactic, right? Which is that you break down trust, you isolate people, you make them feel alone. And if you do that, then democracy cannot work, right? If people don't have facts, they can't organize in any way. Civil society, civic engagement dies. This is why our democracies are dying, right?
But I'm speaking now about those big billionaires, Zuckerberg, Musk, all the Silicon Valleys.
Well, again, I've said this.
And they're coming to the game on top of that because they have quite a different, also a special worldview. So what you deal with them and what's you're looking at?
In 2016, I used to say I felt like Sisyphus and Cassandra combined. My first warning was in Silicon Valley because I was saying, at that point, I wasn't so sure they understood what they were doing. We understood it because we were on the front lines, right? The data shows it to you. In a weird way, being attacked by 90 hate messages per hour meant that I never had to ask the platforms, the tech companies for data. It was coming right at me. All I had to do was take it and analyze it. So that was a blessing and a curse, right? That's how I got to understand what was going on. Silicon Valley's sins came home to roost on January 6, 2021. That was when the violence on Capitol Hill happened. But even then, they didn't care about it because these people were so focused. The tech companies were focused on profit. They didn't realize that as they were making this money, as they were making hundreds of billions of dollars and conquering the stock market, that they were actually taking agency away from people, that they were infecting people with a virus, that this was not a free speech issue, but a safety issue. And we weren't standing up for ourselves all around the world. I'm hoping the global south does this more, right? Again, thereafter, it's funny, you talk to Silicon Valley and they wouldn't let their kids on social media. Right? The people who created this tell their kids to stay off of it because they know the toxic impact of it. And what have they done? It's almost like extractive. It's the most predatory and extractive industry that is least regulated globally because they've taken the money and they've begun to think about, they've given up on the idea of the Universal Development Goals, which is 2030, right? End poverty, all of that, the 17 lists of the Sustainable Development Goals. They've given up on that because they're going to need tremendous amounts of energy to feed their profit machine. And they're willing to do that. So instead of actually trying to figure out how to fix the environment, they just decided they're going to kill it and they're going to have an escape route. A friend of mine wrote that the tech fantasies of the billionaires, Doug Rushkoff wrote this a while ago because he sat in on some of those conversations. One of the conversations he sat in on was a Silicon Valley CEO who was trying to decide whether it's better to use the Secret Service or the FBI when you're trying to protect your food supply, right? Like they've gotten down to this. They're either going to send a rocket so that they could come off of an Earth that's already been fried, or they go underground. They're setting up their escape plans in New Zealand. But here's the point. There's only these fantasies of the billionaires. You can compare those billionaires to Putin. Because ultimately what you're talking about here is impunity. And the kind of impunity where Putin or Netanyahu or the genocide in Myanmar, right, in my part of the world, that impunity in the physical world is mirrored in the virtual world. Because what have they done? Oh yeah, copyright. That does exist. It's a law. It's a global law. And yet what they've done is taken everything every news organization has done and taken it to feed the machines they're building without any compensation. They have the hype of generative AI. The reality is not meeting the hype. And the world is pushed to the precipice in order to get to a point where they can even begin to think about recovering the investments they've stolen to get there. They haven't paid for the crimes of the first AI, the AI of social media. So impunity, whether you're Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, or, oh yeah, who's that guy who's invading Russia? Putin, sorry. Yeah, I mean, in How to Stand Up to a Dictator, I compared, you have to ask, there were two men that I pointed there from the Philippines, right? Who's the bigger dictator, Duterte or Mark Zuckerberg? Duterte was elected. Mark Zuckerberg controls so much of the world, our information ecosystem, and yet is not accountable to anyone.
Maria, you mentioned that you're quite pessimist, but you always speak with a smile, and people after all your talks, which you have a lot, are always inspired because you're also speaking about the good. You really also say, yes, the negative information is spreading better, but there is also something good which can be spread.
Yeah. Look,
Fast. So what is that?
No, I think Ukraine, like us in the Philippines, Rappler is in the trenches. And one of the things, because you're in the trenches, you don't stand still. You can't stand still, right? You can't give up. And so we've had a chance to experiment. And I always find hope from action. My elevator pitch when we formed Rappler in 2012 is we build communities of action, and the food we feed our communities is journalism. So I had three pillars, and this is how we've grown through the years, right? Journalism, technology, and community. The technology is this exoskeleton. This is the backbone of how you build community. That's the distribution platform. So I gain a lot of hope because we built a public infrastructure tech stack several years ago, and we tested it. And now in the Philippines, we have the Philippine Press Institute, which has 65 community news organizations. We have the Daily Guardian in Iloilo and the Sun Star in Cebu. They're on the Matrix protocol with Rappler, right? And it's an MVP for a nationwide federation of news organizations. This is important because it takes it away from Silicon Valley, from big tech, from TikTok. It gives real people the chance to talk to real people without being insidiously manipulated. It's open source, meaning the code is there, anyone can build on it. It's end-to-end encrypted, meaning you're protected. Your data privacy is protected. Open source, end-to-end encrypted. And what's the last one? The tech is the Matrix protocol, which is what we chose to build on, is used by France and Germany for all their government websites because they care about data privacy. This is used by military, by intelligence, by governments, and yet we, the people, are not protected in the same way. So that's what we chose to do. And it wasn't expensive to build. And we will open it to everybody. We actually have, right? So that keeps me optimistic because we're building it. The second is our communities gathering around it. The Social Good Summit, which you were part of, there were discussions on the Matrix chat app. And they were real people asking real questions, watching what we were doing. I think I go back, our community understands the enshittification of the internet and the profit motive of Silicon Valley and TikTok that is using them, right? And that actually, it's funny because TikTok and the American big tech companies never actually set out, maybe TikTok did, but they didn't set out to enable dictators. But that's exactly what they've done. They are in a battle for democracy. The tech platforms that form our public information ecosystem enable the rise of dictators. They are on the side of fascism because they break down facts. They spread lies faster.
I'm researching democracy a lot, and I'm also working now on the book, which also looks at the kind of development of the drone warfare. But my one of the finding is that, and that's where we are now, Ukraine invent, and we're speaking about the weapon, which caused death and destruction. But Ukraine invent for the good reason to defend itself.
Yeah.
And then the Russians are picking up our invention and scale and use them. And when you look at this process, you understand there would be always the good guys creators, and there would be the bad guys who picking it up and using for their cause. So it's not about denouncing the technology.
Actually, I disagree with that. It is about denouncing the technology.
No, meaning technology as such, but thinking about how you use and how you create the civilized rules to use this technology. Because you cannot avoid, you won't shut down internet, you won't stop drones. Some of the things you won't stop AI as such. You really need just first to say that, especially if you're the ones who inventors, they need to be developed with a particular set of rules as more or less drugs. I'm speaking not about the drugs, but pills, medicine, everything we have. So in fact, almost everything could be used. And somehow it's happening that a lot of innovators come up with something with a good reason. But if you don't find the way how to use it for the good, if you don't have some kind of set of the rules and code of conduct, then there would be always bad guy, adversary, anybody.
Let me show you why, yes, Ukraine used the drones well and defended itself, right? But that reminds me of the Arab Spring, right? If you remember the Arab Spring, right, they were able to get rid of all of those students came together. What we should have already learned our lesson from the Arab Spring, which became the Arab Winter just 2 years later. Wael Ghanim, who was with Google, was in Egypt and turned the Arab Spring, or helped create the Arab Spring. And then he, by 2013, we were together and he was telling me, Maria, it's now being used by the government. Because a government, without putting those things in place, can actually deploy it. Here, let me give you an alternative where there were laws put in place immediately. CRISPR technology. CRISPR technology this is genetic splicing to the point that you can create a different human being. I can give you blue eyes. Well, you have brown. I can give myself blue eyes. There's no way I would get blue eyes, right? Because I have black eyes. So what did we do when CRISPR technology came out? Immediately, laws were put in place. And that's part of the reason you don't have two-headed humans. There's now talk about using this to get rid of disease, but still, the technology gives us the ability to have the power of gods without the wisdom of gods. This can change humanity. And that is exactly what we're doing. So I do think it's technology, and I do think it is government's responsibility, especially if you're a democratic government, to protect the people. You have building codes. You have safety codes for airlines, right? If it's something that is rolled out publicly, we test drugs, right? We don't just in the U.S. there's the FDA for food, right? And so that's why I feel like it isn't just technology it should be illegal, but it isn't, because governments have not been protecting the public enough. It's like they're letting us drink poisoned water. So what do we do where we are today? This is where I feel journalists can do a lot more also. And that is by telling people the facts. Here, this is happening. We're seeing with generative AI, children killing themselves with a chatbot. And forget children. There are new studies that are out, right? Audrey Tang just told us that people are led down rabbit holes. They're radicalized by the chatbots. Why? Because we fed the chatbots all of the crap from the internet today. This is not a sustainable world. This is a world where, okay, fine. Silicon Valley believes that a government run by machines will do better than a government run by humans. This is a fallacy. You know, there's a whole thing on effective altruism, which again, just like the hype of generative AI, so far is false. It's hype because there is so much money there. So what do we do? I think this goes back to the people. If the people understand the risk, then they can demand better. So I go back. Look at America. Will Americans understand and demand and reclaim their rights? I hope so. They're kind of slow to burn. It took Pearl Harbor to bring America into World War II. And then, of course, the atom bomb happened. So I don't know what will happen now. This is a pivotal moment. Ukraine is on the front lines, as are we in the Philippines. Because, again, that hell to purgatory, somehow we found our way out of it. The question is, will we be able to survive if the West falls? Global South, Brazil has done a great job of leading against President Trump. But here's the warning to Europe. The longer they do not act, not just on Ukraine, but the longer Europe doesn't act on the patterns that are clear, the trends that are clear, right? Whether it's in the UK, in France, in Germany, in Canada, we are seeing the election of far-right governments precisely because of the public information ecosystem. If nothing is done to literally clean this up, to stop the factory of lies, the world falls. So what are the tipping point? The US is a tipping point. But also, these European countries are tipping points. If they fall, then let's see what happens in the global South, right? But the trends are clear.
If there would be, kind of a few advice you sometimes give them on reinforce some kinds of the optimism and empower some of the journalists and the newsrooms to do something, what would be that? What would be the first thing you would advise to newsrooms to do? Not in terms of what not to do, what to not to report or how to regulate, but really like to do something positive.
Radical collaboration. Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Journalists are on the same side. And you know what? The battle, it's not against Putin. It's not against Trump. It's against big tech. Because the first thing we need to reclaim is the integrity of the public information ecosystem. Our people are going to need to be able to tell fact from fiction. We need to live in a shared reality, which is actually the journalists. This is our domain, right? We were the gatekeepers that kept that information integrity. We were accountable for it. Big tech is not. So that's the first is, and we can do that. We're hoping, or we've worked on getting the code out for the Matrix Protocol chat app. That hopefully goes. We need a public tech infrastructure. Finally, Europe is starting to talk about digital sovereignty. But now it's a whole different thing, and there's no time to waste. That's number one. Number two is that if you look everywhere around the world, small and medium-sized news organizations are dying because the business model is dead. Advertising has largely shifted to big tech. And so that's yet another instance where we need to work together. And frankly, democratic governments and philanthropic groups from the West need to see the dire emergency that is there. This is the moment. In the next 6 to 8 months, so you're talking about a year or so, if we do not act enough, we will fall. And again, if we do, it'll take a long time. In the Philippines, it took almost 21 years under the President Marcos, the first one. In Indonesia, under Suharto, it took almost 32 years. But this tech-enabled fascism, right? Especially when biotech meets infotech, that's control at a cellular level of a democracy. We will not have democracy. This is a whole different world. It's like a Black Mirror episode. I can't believe it. But this is the point. At the UN, I called this an information Armageddon. That the mother of all battles is information integrity. We got to do it now. Because if we don't, then the next generation will grow up under a completely different world where climate change is seen as a hoax, right? The planet will heat up. In One Young World in Germany, where they did it this year in Munich, 2,000 plus young leaders for the first time moved climate change to number 2 concern. Their number 1 concern is nuclear war.
In Ukraine, especially with all the Russian fakes, and they are like the masterminds behind. I was speaking still about the time 2014, 2015. We were speaking a lot in different forums about the fake news, about, what RT does, all those things.
Yeah.
But I should also say that disregarding how was a Russian TV channel, Ukrainian channels and Ukrainian media controlled by the Russian, system, which was way more than media. It was like the campaign where the military, everybody was having this coordinated campaign. Yet, both in Crimea and the occupied Donbass, if there was no Russian soldiers with the weapon, if there was no Russian fleet at the military base, and literally not just the spies, but real Russian soldiers, the war won't break. So I think for us now, I'm trying always to balance and I definitely don't undermine, the tech and the all kind of enablers, information as an enabler for this fight. But I was told with a book which was called Truth is the First Casualty of War. But then it's disregarding, I'm saying there is also something about the physical security and the capacity. For instance, you mentioned not Putin, but the physical capacity, the oil money, the money to create the rockets, the missiles, anything. This hardcore oil money, old-fashioned, enables paying people who kill people. So, and I'm saying that I'm definitely not contradicting, but I think for me it's always about to ground, everything, understanding that we are living with 2 threats, and some of the threats can be also stopped just on the physical battlefield because that's the only way.
But you assume that they are separate. Again, the report that we just finished in America, 143 executive orders in 100 days. That's President Trump's first 100 days, right? Those 143 executive orders acted in the real world, but they were content triggers in the virtual world, and they work hand in hand. It's like chicken or the egg, right? Would Russian soldiers have been there if there was no Russian disinformation?
Yeah, sure. It's a chicken and egg thing.
I would say, I would say
you know
the
why?
reason.
Why want to enforce it? Because in particular for some Europeans, they think that still you can kind of delay anything connected with virtual. And I think like this virtual
not
very
at all.
much connected with
In fact, I think that's the first. You know how I know this? That's what started with me. I was attacked first online, social media lies coming up, which was like fertilizer to allow the arrest 2 years later. It gives cover because a weakened democracy means, like, if these attacks weren't there, when I was arrested 2 years later, there would have been greater outcry. There should have been a greater outcry if the disinformation wasn't there first, I think, right? So
what happens to your case now? So you said is a Supreme Court, and in fact the visit of the Amal Clooney, who used to be and is still a lawyer, is about that. So actually you were accused of something you didn't try.
Yeah. It makes me like embarrassed, I guess is the right word, because I never want the story to be about me. But Amal really always focuses on the fact that I could go to jail at any day, right? The decision could be made any day. There's no transparency in the Supreme Court process right now for me. And our case has been at the Supreme Court.
What this case is about? I understand it's
cyber libel, and I'm in order to travel, there are certain stipulations that I have to follow. I'm the person that probably should not talk about it, but it's a story that we ran in way after the period of prescription for libel. Anyway, I could go to jail for up to 7 years, a story that was published before the law we supposedly violated even existed. I mean, Amal says this better than I do. But the problem there is that we've had it at the Supreme Court since 2022. Nothing has happened. And every time I travel, I have to ask for permission from the Supreme Court. So this is a warning again to Americans, because I'm teaching in Columbia University, right? And the warning is, when you lose your rights, you're not going to get them back immediately. You claw them back. So it's better to fight for your rights before you lose them, right? This is the problem with Ukraine. Look, you could have maybe won that if you had gotten the resources in the first year. Again, he goes back. This is not the time to delay on anything, whether it's in the virtual world or the physical world.
So there were George and Amal Clooney. George is like an incredible celebrity, a very charming man in person.
Both are.
They both are. So you made them come here. They supported the cause. They spoken about the importance of the journalists and, in free press, including in Philippines. How are they actually?
I think they're great. I joke all the time, if President Duterte had not attacked me and Rappler, I would never have met Amal Clooney, right? I probably wouldn't have the Nobel Peace Prize. Hello. It's like Amal asked to take the case, has been working on it pro bono since 2019. And we never expected it to last this long. She remains focused on it. And I joke all the time because I tell her, look, please, if something happens to me, just get me out of jail. And she goes, I don't know whether I can. She worries about the case so that I could keep working. And that is what I would wish for every journalist around the world. Sometimes I wonder why she cares about it so much. This was a question I asked them on stage. We didn't know each other. Why? Why do you care? And I think they see a global world. They understand a global world. And they have kids. They want to make the world better. And you talk about soft power. This is the Clooney.
I think that's very important about George in particular, because of course she's a barrister, but he comes from the family of the political TV anchor.
Both of them. Her mom is an investigative journalist, right?
So that's why they are, and you feel it, because it matters for them.
Interesting to listen, right?
Yes, because we treat them as her, still she's a human rights defender, but he's like an actor, Hollywood actor. So you kind of don't think, about all his charity work and elsewhere, but then you understand where it's coming from. Couple of other questions. You were at CNN It's a global network. And you returned to Philippines to found a Rappler. Why?
Actually, I came back first to head the largest news organization in the Philippines. So I made the decision in 2004. By that point, I had opened the Manila Bureau in 1987, the Jakarta Bureau in 1995. And I'd been with CNN for almost 2 decades. And I was tired of breaking news. I was tired of writing about what everyone else was building. And it was a time to build. So I wanted to come back home. So I did. I came back to take everything I had learned and teach our, I headed the largest news organization in the Philippines, the same one whose franchise or license to broadcast was taken away by President Duterte. Until today, Duterte is gone, but ABS-CBN does not have a franchise. It cannot operate. It cannot broadcast. I came home. That's about 1,000 journalists. I had a great time managing that. I did that for 6 years. And then I realized that if you're a legacy media group, the things that make you money are not where the world was going, which was the internet. Those legacy media groups at that time put their third string people on the internet, young or third string. I wanted to focus on it, especially in the Philippines, where our median age is 23 years old, right? We live on social media. Like I said, for 6 years in a row until 2021, Filipinos spent the most time online and on social media globally, despite the fact that our internet speeds are super slow. So I came in 2010, I resigned from ABS-CBN. I wrote my second book, and then we started Rappler. And I raised the money for Rappler in 2011, and by 2012, our website was up. So, and the whole idea there is to be able, like tech for good, right? That we can reach people. I believed in social media. That's why it feels like a stab in the back. It's ironic because when did it become bad? It became bad when they were forced to make more money, right? Because at the beginning, we were using Twitter for disaster risk reduction management. The Philippines has an average of 20 typhoons every year, and we were using Twitter and geolocation to find people who were lost in the storm who needed help. That's impossible now because you can't trust Twitter anymore. And nobody will put their location on it, right? This is what we have lost in their search for profits. But, what if government was doing that? Anyway, we did work with government during that time period.
How do you manage your time? You kind of like live on this planet. How did you find a plan to be with your team, to support them, bring some energy into that, but also being all over the place?
I have to say it's probably technology, right? Okay, to go back to what you're saying, can you use it for good? Business models that allow you to use it for good, right? I hold meetings in the if I'm in New York, then our meetings begin at 8 p.m., go until 2 a.m. And then I teach in the morning, but late morning, so it's not so bad. I can do both. If I'm in the Philippines, then, I do the work that I need to do. And I spend a lot more time on the plane than normal human beings.
So how did you take your, I'm literally asking for an advice. I think we'll share this advice with Alexandra, but Hichuk, who is here, and how do you do that? Where did you take energy? Because I feel that a lot of people just are tired in Ukraine and doing extraordinary jobs, but they need kind of some human advice of how you, in fact, find this thing inside of you and also to share it with your team.
I was literally doing a city and a speech a day from Europe to America. I was going back and forth. I feel like there's no other option but to do it because these times matter. And I don't know whether it makes a difference, but if I'm in a room full of 150 people and I can touch 20 people, that makes a difference. Like yesterday in that room full of people at the Social Good Summit, it went from our speakers to the people who were listening because they are motivated to change the world. We only have this time. That's what pushes me. Here's the advice. Sleep on the plane. Jet lag is a choice. It really is. You just have to, like, when you land, don't sleep until it's nighttime.
It's quite an advice because I really feel like, of course, it's an honor and you deserve the prize, but I understand it's kind of a burden on your shoulders which forces you.
Even before the Nobel, it's funny. I was worried about this because we could see the data, right? And then I say the same things, but people listen differently after the Nobel. The data is there. Anyone can look at it. And, the way we protect our democracy is not by one person alone. It's what Ukraine's doing, right? We're going to have to move people to act.
You received the Nobel Prize with Dmitry Muratov, the founder of the editor-in-chief of Novaya Gazeta. I remember very well that winter when you were receiving it. I was listening live your acceptance speech. His speech was very doomed. In fact, we were not even fully understanding because it was like call on action as if he was like really knew the war will happen. And we were still in denial mode. I should also say that, Ukrainians have difficult relations with Russian liberals, and Dmitry is quite a specific person because he stays in Moscow. It's kind of old legacy person, and we know that under kind of cover, under the light, if it's necessary, to assist or reach out to, like a Russian government to help a Ukrainian journalist, he'll be there. So, but he's still kind of, like this former insider. He was always in a position, but he's not this open denouncer. He's always about Russia. He rarely speaks about Ukraine. He always speaks, about Putin, but very rarely about Ukraine. What is your interaction with Dmitry? Ukrainians want some of the Russians, people of that side, support Ukraine openly. Dmitry is more denouncing his government rather than...
Yeah, let me add here, right? If you look at his speech, look, he's been a bear man for me. Like a bear as in, he hugs you. I don't know him aside from that, but we shared a Nobel Peace Prize. My best friend from college lived in Russia for decades, married a Russian, and understands Russian society in a way that I don't. And the debate that I've had is, if you look at his speech, I don't think he mentions Putin at all. Ukrainians would see that. But I don't understand Russia well enough. I don't understand what Dmitry has gone through. I think you know the nuances, the same way that I've had to explain the nuances of Filipino culture. Each of our cultures are different. I think one debate I had with him is that if I feel like I cannot shoot an arrow straight, if I cannot call a spade, I would shut down Rappler because I will not be used to whitewash, right? I don't want to whitewash something, right? And also I have 4 co-founders. We're aligned in our values. I should interview you about what you thought.
It should be my first question, but now it's the last question, and somehow you also answer that. But we were there, Ukrainians, in the Social Good Summit. There were foreigner speakers, but we're quite a country which is not very close to Philippines.
Yeah.
Why you care about Ukraine? And before saying that, I'm of course waiting for you there, because I think this country has to become for you, real. So as soon as you setting a foot on it, you can feel that. Some things which from your knowledge, from all our meetings, from your compassion, from your incredible empathy, still you would understand it better if you'll come. And I know now your book is being translated. When I posted a photo with
Really?
you, yes, it's a beautiful, great Ukrainian publishing house.
Yes,
and the publisher who is fighting in the Ukrainian army now. But he said right away, we're translating Maria's book. And we're like, yes, so it's coming. You'll need to come for the launch. So, what Ukraine's for you?
Well, no,
Why you care?
I think in Southeast Asia, we feel very far away from Ukraine, which is there with Russia. People think and then also there's a whole thing. It's not just the distance. It doesn't feel like it's our battle. And part of the reason I wanted Alexandra and wanted you to come is because you're at the front lines the way we were. These are the front lines. And Filipinos need to understand how far Ukrainians are going to protect their freedoms, and to ask ourselves, can we do the same thing? Because if we don't act now, we need to be able to do the same thing, right? Will you pick up a gun to protect your freedoms? Will you, it's funny, I grew up with hostile environment training, right? And one of the first things they tell you is if there's gunfire and there's someone injured in the middle of the street, the first thing you do is this one phrase: danger to me, danger to you. You don't walk in the middle of gunfire to pick up someone if someone else is shooting. But how far does this go? And this goes right back to humanity. Sorry, there's a lot of stuff in there, right? But I guess what I wanted was, I've seen Alexandra, and I've done many speeches together with her. And our messages have coalesced, because I think we were at the front lines at the information warfare, and Ukraine is on the front lines of the physical battle. If Ukraine falls, it will reverberate to the rest of the world. If we lose this battle for information integrity, the battle for democracy is gone. This is it. So that's what I wanted to bring to the Philippines. And beyond that, you could see in the other people we invited, Carol Cadwallader, who broke the Cambridge Analytica story. I didn't even point out that Filipinos are the second most number of compromised accounts. Audrey Tang, Taiwan under the shadow of China, the other behemoth that hasn't moved yet, right? And yet Audrey, is so optimistic and continues to find hope in action, right? This is the alert. And beyond the alert, this is the time to form the communities of action that will work to protect our democracy.